This is JCT TV, Bible study for the 21st century. Welcome, friends. Jim Cantelon here. We are going through the book of Matthew at remarkably slow speed. We're in the 23rd chapter of Matthew, and it's just such a fascinating chapter where Jesus has been vilifying and upbraiding, rebuking even, the Pharisees for their legalistic religion. And we're almost at the end of it. We're going to see a little lament of Jesus over Jerusalem. But first of all, we'll take a break, and then we'll get right to it. You can be sure that the Pharisees in the crowd, and there would have been scores of them, were more than a bit discomfited, to use an old English word, at Jesus' words, all of these woes that he proclaimed on them. But each of them struck home. They knew that he was right. That didn't make it any easier to hear, but they knew that he was speaking like a prophet to them, and they resisted it. And so as he's wrapping things up to them, in verse 34 of chapter 23, he says, "Therefore, I am sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you'll kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that's been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I tell you, all this will come on this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often have I longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Look, your house has left you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Wow. This is from the heart. Jesus is obviously very moved here. And the expectation of most of the early followers of Christ, pardon me, let me just change the sentence. The expectation that Jesus had on these who would be followers of Christ and those who would resist him was such that he polarized. Either he was son of God or he was son of the devil. He was one or the other. And the Pharisees certainly saw him as the other, okay? But here, as he basically threatens them, I find it interesting. He says, "Therefore, I am sending you prophets and sages and teachers." Now, this is Jesus talking, okay? They're looking right at him. He's human. They're human. He right there is in space and time. They're there in space and time. And now he's talking about, I am sending you prophets and sages, and as if he somehow has mastery over the future and over the calling of prophets to the nation of Israel. There's a certain hint here of Jesus, Son of God, not just Son of Man, because he was both, okay? But he says, I'll send them, okay? But you'll kill them. You'll crucify them. It's almost like what the chronicler says in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 15 and 16, all over again. Quote, the Lord, the God of their ancestors, sent word to them through his messengers again and again, because he had pity on his people and on his dwelling place. But they mocked God's messengers, despised his words, scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord was aroused against his people, and there was no remedy. No remedy to this stiff-necked, hard-hearted, intransigent, religious people. And that's why Jesus laments, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. It's the hardness of their hearts. It's not just the rejection, but the hardness of their hearts, which means that ultimately, and Jesus knew this because as Son of God, he knew this, Jerusalem itself would ultimately be destroyed. The Roman Titus saw this happen in 70 AD. And in her desolation, it was as though the nation had died. But it hadn't. There is a promise here that a second triumphal entry awaits. He says, look, I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, this is verse 39, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Just like they had said in the triumphal entry, it will be said again, only it will be said by a remnant. It will not be said by the entire nation, by tens of thousands of people in the city of Jerusalem. It's a sober and somber day that awaits. It will be a glorious day. But Jesus laments that so many will die in their unbelief. You know, I can't even begin to imagine what it must have been like for Jesus coming from the throne of glory, from the inner courts of the indescribable, ineffable kingdom of heaven, reducing himself to such a level that he was able to inhabit with other humans this little planet spinning around on the outer fringes of the Milky Way galaxy. A bit of sand, a bit of dust compared to the galaxy. And our galaxy, which is so massive with 300 billion stars, is a minor galaxy in an endless universe, it seems. Maybe multiple universes with trillions of galaxies. It boggles the mind. It really does. I mean, I get feeling boggled and humbled just when I think about the fact there's, 8 billion people living on this planet. More than half of whom are living on less than $1 a day. That's why we have WOW, by the way, Working for Orphans and Widows, which you see promoted on this show. We believe the Lord is calling us to the poorest of the poor, to the least of these, as Jesus called them. But we're just one little candle, one little light. Thank God there's thousands of others also lighting their candles. But nevertheless, it's humbling. I don't get into politics, but you hear all these voices out there, especially during a time of election. And one voice tells you that this is the truth. Another voice tells you that is the truth. And then you have all these other conspiracy theories and shades of truth and shades of lies, and sometimes outright lies that are bombarding us through the media. um, every opinion is coming from 1 in 8 billion people. So how much value should I place on that one opinion? Now, that doesn't mean that one opinion can't be the truth. What I'm saying is this. There are so many voices coming at us that it basically we're beginning to become hearing impaired. You can only listen to so much noise before you begin to either tune it out, tone it out, or just deafen yourself to all of the clamor. The sorrow of Jesus' heart here relates to the fact that that 1 in a billion is someone who's been created in the image of God. Wherever they're coming from, wherever they're raising their voice, for better or for worse, usually they're raising their voice in despair. Certainly the majority of the world is in despair right now. The Lord hears the cry for help. The Lord hears the cry of sorrow. And you know, friends, those are the voices we need to hear. We don't need to be listening to all of the clamor. Vote this way, vote that way. You know, this is the truth, that's the truth. I mean, where does it end? But when someone as close as your neighbor, their husband has just died, or one of their children's just been diagnosed with leukemia, or there's been a car accident, or there's been a financial reversal, or there's been some other kind of crisis, and you know about it, that's the time to be a light in their darkness. To be 1 in 8 billion people that comes in not with an opinion, not with a convincing argument, but comes in with a heart of compassion. In my hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times over the years that I've visited sick and dying in the hospitals as a pastor, many times I'll pray with the person from my congregation who's there, but then there's 2 or 3 other people in the room who are also on beds of sickness. They can hear what I'm doing. I'll go to each of them in turn. I don't know them. And I say, you just heard me praying with your friend here. Can I pray for you? Not once in all of those hundreds of hospital visits have I been turned down. Even if someone is an atheist, but they're about to die, and they know they're about to die, they want to hear from someone who has faith. 1 voice in a billion who doesn't come with an opinion, but comes with a word of hope. Jesus wept over those whose necks were stiff and hearts were hard. Let our hearts be soft.
With your help, WOW, working for Orphans and Widows, want to give a bicycle to our volunteers in Africa. Volunteers walk hours along winding, dusty roads to visit people who are sick and dying. They bathe and clean them, bring them medicines and food, and lots of care and support. Would you like to wrap a bicycle this Christmas? What a difference a bicycle would make. Instead of 6 hours to get there, they can get there in 2. This Christmas, we're asking you to wrap up a bicycle. Here's how. Donate through our website, by phone or by check.
So friends, you just watched a promo from WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, which is the international charity my wife and I founded 25 years ago, about wrapping up a bicycle for Christmas. Now, this is our 3rd year promoting this concept at Christmas time. People love it. And I'll tell you why. With WOW, we work with tens of thousands of people. And that, I'm not bragging, I'm just simply reporting. That's just the way it is. After 25 years, you do grow and you become bigger than you ever thought you'd become in terms of ministry. But boy, there's so much more to go. I mean, this horizon of need on the level in which we're dealing with it is an endless horizon. There's always more than it seems we have capacity to handle. I sometimes tell people with our work with orphans and widows, I feel like the Lord has called us to sweep the ocean back with a broom. Nevertheless, our work is predicated on local church engagement. As a pastor, and especially as the Africans saw it and still see it to this day, coming from Jerusalem, as I did in those early years, they called me the bishop from Jerusalem, which I'm not, but they gave me that honor. They would gather, pastors would gather with their volunteer leaders for 2 and 3 day conferences where I would present to them a vision for the pursuit of righteousness and justice. Righteousness in terms of preaching the gospel, justice in terms of living the gospel. Love for God and love for neighbor, living the gospel with orphans and widows in their catchment areas who were dying in those early days of HIV and AIDS, still are in many cases. But then COVID-19, opportunistic infections, and just poverty-related afflictions. Churches were surrounded by this, okay? And so I would call preachers together, and they would come. And sometimes I'd have 60, sometimes on a few occasions I had 6,000. The number is not the issue. What is the issue is that pastors needed to be awakened to the need to care for orphans and widows in their distress. HIV and AIDS still is the biggest orphan and widowmaker in the history of mankind. Add to that COVID-19 issues, cholera issues, food insecurity issues, tuberculosis, other opportunistic infections, and you have a perfect storm of sorrow. So, what I said to the pastors was, you got to meet these needs in Jesus' name. You can't walk by that little orphan again and not get down in the dust face to face and ask him his name and say, I'm Pastor so-and-so, take me to your mother. My church wants to help you. A lot of pastors were intimidated by that very notion because back in the early days, HIV and AIDS was very much attached to stigma and discrimination. Some of them actually believed that HIV and AIDS was God's punishment for sexual immorality, and they would avoid HIV people like they avoided lepers. Thank God that's changed. Nevertheless, what I said to the pastors was, you need to mobilize your people. You need to create armies of volunteers who will reach out to these suffering and dying people with the hands and feet of Jesus. Well, it began to happen. And over the course of the first few years, I began to identify what I call champions, pastor leaders who really caught this vision, who began to mobilize people in their churches and in surrounding churches, because pastor to pastor often would become like teams. And before we knew it, we had these teams of volunteers, local church-based, going out in the communities, finding and identifying those who are dying from various diseases, and ministering to them 2 and 3 times a week with things as practical as bathing their bed sores, cleaning them because of dysentery. No kidding. Providing a blanket so they didn't have to lie on the dirt floor in their little rondavel, their little mud hut with the grass roof. Bringing them some potable water. Bringing medicines and ointments that would help relieve their stresses, their bad colds, their sores, their oral thrush, their fevers. And as this ministry grew, these groups of volunteers, under their champion leaders from local churches, began to go farther and farther afield. And in doing so, they had to walk, sometimes kilometers, miles, to get to even just one patient. And sometimes they would walk 2 and 3 and 4 hours one way, then 3 and 4 hours back the other. So with the ministry on site, in combination with the time traveled, they'd leave sometimes in the dark and get home in the dark, which you don't want to do in Africa, especially if you're a woman. And most of these volunteers are widows themselves, have a heart of compassion for widows, and are impoverished themselves. But they reach out with what little they have. So, it didn't take me long to clue in. Number one, I'm going to help these volunteers with food security so that at least they can go to their patients on a full stomach. Secondly, I want to make sure that they have enough financial support to pay the school fees for their children to go to school. And thirdly, I want to get them a bicycle. A bicycle. A bike can change a 3-hour walk into a maybe 1 hour and 20-minute bicycle ride, or even less. And what's more, when they get to the patient, and the patient needs to be taken to one of the little rural clinics, they can put the patient on the back of their bicycle in the little carrier there and transport them themselves to the clinic. And that's what began to happen. Now, here's the thing. The bike is a terrific, it's indispensable now. But can you imagine taking someone who's so sick they can hardly keep their head up on the back of a bicycle? So often they would put them on that carrier, maybe put some kind of a little padding there so it wasn't too difficult to sit on for a few hours. And they would walk alongside the bicycle, pushing this patient. And sometimes the patient wasn't strong enough to even kind of sit up. And so what these precious volunteers would do is they get on their bikes and they would strap themselves around the waist to the patient and ride 2 up. It boggles the mind. But they thank me from the bottom of their hearts for those bicycles. Giving them a bicycle is like giving you and me a car. It's transformed their lives. We started out with very simple, cheaply made bicycles from Asia, which soon began to show wear and tear. And so now what we're doing is we're getting them heavy-duty bicycles, which cost 3 times as much as the early bicycles did. But hey, what's $300? That's the cost of a bicycle. And then I get them a repair kit that costs about $15 so they can, fix a flat or sometimes oil a chain, whatever. Wrap up a bicycle this Christmas, friends, for a volunteer. You can log on to wowmission.com and go to the donate page. That's probably the best route to take. Wowmission.com. 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 And follow the threads to the donate page. You can, there's mailing addresses there that come up on the screen, both in Canada, Burlington, Ontario, and in the US, in Atlanta, Georgia. You could get to us with your support. And I was thrilled a few months ago with Kathy to be there when 50 bicycles were given, 50 new ones were given to 50 volunteers. The singing, the shouting, the rejoicing, the dancing, the ululating, you've heard that. The drums beating, the dancing so intense that there was a dust cloud above them, and singing and singing and singing praises to the Lord for these bicycles. So over the course of the last 3 years, I think we've been able to donate, maybe 300 or 400 bicycles. So many more to donate. But by God's grace, we're going to do it. And interestingly, in one of our fields, I was asked humbly by our champion there, could some of our church planters use these bicycles? I said, what? That's a no-brainer, of course. This is a local church-based ministry. If a bicycle is going to help a pioneer pastor plant a church, go for it. Because before you know it, that church will be supporting our work as well. So, I leave it with you. Why not wrap up a bicycle this Christmas time? It's a cool idea. You'll love it. It works.
Working for Orphans and Widows, known as WOW, has been compassionately caring for what Jesus called the least of these for 25 years in sub-Saharan Africa. Founded by Jim and Cantelon in 1999, WOW has a trusted track record in South Africa, Zambia, and Malawi. The main focus of WOW is to provide home-based care for the poorest of the poor in isolated rural areas. WOW's ministry is comprehensive, engaging children, youth, young adults, widows, and pastors in providing relief for bed sores, oral thrush, skin cancers, hygienic afflictions, and tuberculosis, to twice-weekly visits for monitoring and evaluation. All this is faithfully ministered in Jesus' name. Those who die do so with dignity and always in the Lord. For 25 years, WOW has faithfully and humbly tried to express your love as donors, and the love of God as Father to the weakest link. The joy on their faces as they receive the gift of love is exhilarating.
You know, one sweet woman, just a little diminutive gal with a soft voice and an angelic face, was thanking me a few months ago in Malawi for the bicycle we provided. She'd been walking 8 hours a day, and now it was down to about 3.5 hours because of her bicycle. She says, I'm so grateful because now it gives me time to care for my church as well. I said, what? You're a pastor? Yes, pastor. I'm a pastor. I'll tell you, it's humbling working with these saints of God. We go there to bless them, and invariably, they bless us. So we work with orphans and widows. And by God's grace, we not only preach the gospel, but we practice the gospel. The very thing Jesus said we should be doing, practicing what we preach. Humbly, we're trying to do that, and I know that in your life, you want to do the same. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye for now.